Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. My name is Janae, if you didn't know, and today's video is another true crime episode. So if you're ready, let's go. Okay guys, so I redid my nails because the other ones was falling off, and I actually hate these. I don't like them. I don't like them at all. It's very much giving Jocelyn Hernandez right now. Bitch, you look a mess. I don't like these. I was trying to do something else. Like this wasn't what I was going for, but this is what we got, so I'm gonna rock with it until it's not rocking with me no more, until they start popping off. But anyways y'all, today's case is a wild one. It's a little loco crazy, so we just gonna go ahead and hop right into it, and let's do this. So Dianne Keidel was born on April 19th, 1935 in Peoria, Illinois to her parents Virgil and Margaret Keidel. Now there's not very much known about her early life, but I do know that she went to Peoria High School and she graduated in 1953. And just a year later in 1954 she would be married and have a child. But this marriage wouldn't really last that long because by 1956, when Dianne was just 21 years old, she would be divorced. Because she was divorced and had a 2-year-old child to take care of, Dianne would have to find work. But that wouldn't be really that hard because she would just start working at her dad's grocery store to make money for her and her child. And it was while she was working at this grocery store, she would meet a man named Dianne Keidel, who went by, I think, his middle name, which was Gene. Gene was said to not be the best looking guy in the building, but he was a smooth talker. Like, he had a mouthpiece on him, and he talked Dianne right into a relationship with him. And over the course of a year, the couple will fall in love and eventually ended up getting married. And they will move to Phoenix, Arizona, where Gene had got a construction job. And throughout the course of their marriage, they would have 3 more kids. They would have a little boy named Greg and 2 daughters named Kelly and Lori. And I forgot to mention, but Diane's older daughter, the one that she had prior to marrying Gene, her name is Susie. Now, after about 8 years of marriage, Dianne would actually go missing. Now, by the time that Dianne went missing, they had decided together that their marriage just wasn't working and that it would be best for them to divorce. So they were actually separated at the time of her disappearance. So it was September 17th, 1966. And like I said, the couple was separated, but they were still what I would consider to be amicable because they had ended up meeting at a restaurant that night in order to work out the final details of their divorce. And after they had dinner, Dianne dropped Gene off at his new apartment because, you know, like I said, they were separated. So they wasn't sharing the house no more. Gene had went off and got himself an apartment, and Dianne dropped him off after their little dinner date. But Dianne wasn't done for the night though, because throughout the course of their separation, she was dating. Even though the divorce hadn't been finalized yet, Dianne was sticking her toe back into the dating pool. She wasn't waiting for the ink to dry on the paper, and we're not judging. So after she dropped Gene off, she went to a place called the Amber Inn, which sounded like a motel to me, but I think it was a bar. From the way it looked on the episode, it seems like it was a bar. And she met with a guy named Bob Marlin. Not Marley, Bob Marlin. And they proceeded to have drinks and be on a date and enjoy each other's company. But after she left the bar with Bob, that was the last time Dianne would be seen again. And while Dianne was out with Bob, Gene called the house and the kids told him that Dianne wasn't home yet. And I guess because of the time it was, or maybe he just didn't want the kids to be at home alone, Gene decided to go to the house so he could watch the kids. And he was only going to stay there until Dianne got back. But he ended up falling asleep. And when he woke up, he noticed that Dianne's car was in the driveway, but there was no sign of Dianne. And because of this, Gene called the police and filed a missing persons report. So police started talking to neighbors and family and stuff like that, and they said that there's no way that Dianne would have ever just left her kids. She was too good of a mother, and it just wasn't happening. She wasn't just going to leave her kids like that. And they also determined that Dianne did in fact make it home because not only was her car in the driveway, but her purse and her keys was in the house. So the police talked to Gene, and he told them about them going to dinner, her dropping them off, and then him coming over to watch the kids. And the kids corroborate this story. And so the next person that the police want to talk to is the person that she was last seen with at the bar, which is Bob Marlin. And so they go to get in contact with Bob, only to find out that the very next day, on September 18th, 1966, Bob had a heart attack and died. So anything that he may have known about the disappearance of Dianne, or if he had any involvement in the disappearance of Dianne, they were at a dead end right there because he was no longer there to tell them what he may or may not have known. In the meantime, while the investigation is going on, Gene packed up his little apartment and moved back into the family home. And I guess that would make the most sense. Instead of moving the kids from the house that they have known all of their lives to a small ass apartment, it makes sense that he wouldn't want to disrupt the kids' lives any more than it's already been disrupted, right? Now, naturally, people who knew the family from around town would start seeing Gene and the kids, but they wouldn't see Diane no more. And not knowing the details of her sudden disappearance, they would ask Gene. And despite him previously making a missing persons report, Gene would tell anybody who listened that Diane ran off with a boyfriend. And I'm thinking, like, if you knew she ran off with a boyfriend, why would you call the police and tell them she missing? Because she not missing. You know where she at. You just don't know who she with, right? Or rather, you know she's somewhere, right? She's not missing. I don't know. Anyways, Gene would also provide a list of men that Diane was seeing during a separation to the police. And police obviously followed up on all of these leads, and every last one of them turned out to be dead ends. And unfortunately, Diane's case would start going cold because there was just nothing that led to any tips about her disappearance. So Gene and the kids tried to settle into their new normal, but this family just could not catch a break because just 4 months later, in January of 1967, the house would catch fire. Now, all 4 of the kids were in the house at the time of the fire. However, Gene was out at a laundromat doing some laundry when this happened. And the children, they tried to escape the fire, but unfortunately, only 2 of them would make it out alive. And that was 5-year-old Lori and 8-year-old Greg. 13-year-old Susie and 8-year-old Kelly didn't make it out of this fire. Lori would end up having 3rd-degree burns over 50% of her body and having to spend 4 months in the hospital to recover. The fire was investigated and it was determined to be accidental because there was a melted pot that was found on the eye on the stove, and the burner was actually in the on position. So it was determined that maybe somebody was trying to cook something and just forgot and fell asleep. So after the fire, Gene rebuilt the house, and him and the kids once again tried to get back into a state of like just some type of normalcy in the household after 2 major tragedies happened pretty much back to back. But as they tried to move forward with their lives, the kids will often think of their mother more. I don't want to say more so Lori than Greg, but I feel like more so Lori than Greg, because years later, and I mean like years and years later, like 27 years later in 1993, there would be a break in the case that came from Lori herself. And Lori pretty much wrote a letter to a police department saying that when she was 5 years old, she saw her father murder and bury her mother. Yeah. So this letter basically outlined what she had seen at 5 years old, and she said that she hadn't come forward until now because she was deathly afraid of her father. She said that her dad was definitely one of those "I brought you in this world and I'll take you out" type of parents. And unlike most people who hear that as a child, they don't really think too much of it. No, Lori, based off of what she had seen her father do to her mother, she wholeheartedly believed that he would take her out. And so she didn't say anything for all of these years, but now she was an adult and she felt like she had to say something, even though she was still scared as hell. Now, when Lori was 5 years old and she seen the death of her mother, she kind of was naive to the situation. She was a child, and so she was really just innocent in the whole thing, and she thought that her dad made her mom go to sleep. And when he buried her, she still thought that she was asleep. She even asked one time, could she dig a hole in the backyard so that she could feed her mom, because she was like, she probably hungry. Like, just the innocence of it all. You know, like, she was just so innocent. But anyways, as the years went on, as she got older, she started to realize what happened, thus bringing her forth now. And when she provided this letter, the detective who received it, he kind of was skeptical, because there was people in this world who would claim to know something or claim to be a part of a crime that really wasn't, and he was very aware of this. So he didn't really know what to make of the situation. But the way in which Lori presented herself and presented the letter to him, he felt like there was something genuine there. And even though he was still a bit like wary of it, he wanted to look into it just in case there was something here. Now, Lori told the detective that her dad had poured concrete over the place where he buried his wife, but she could show them the general area of where her mother's body should be, right? But before they could really do anything, they had to get permission from the new owners of the house, because the house had been sold for many years at this point. And the detectives didn't want to alarm the new owners or ask them like, hey, can I dig up your backyard and then there be nothing there. He didn't want to ask them without proof of there being something there. And so for a year, he would search for a way in which he could find evidence without having to dig up their backyard. Now, throughout this whole year, while this investigator was doing his research, Lori was terrified because her daddy was still alive. He was remarried and he lived across town. So he still lived in Arizona. And Lori was scared that he would find out that she had told what she knew. And she honestly felt like the detectives didn't believe her, which is why they was like, we need more evidence. But little did she know that the detective was, he was doing his little research. And in his research, about a year after Lori's confession, he came across a nonprofit organization called NecroSearch. And basically, they provided the little machines where you could like run it across the ground and then detect a disturbance in the ground, I guess. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but y'all know what I'm trying to say. It's like X-ray. Now, this is nothing new to us now, but back then, this was new technology. This was like fresh. And so once this organization told him about this new device, he got a hold of one, and him and his team went to the backyard. I mean, obviously, they asked the new homeowners, and they was okay with it. They went to the backyard where Lori said her mother should be, and they started running it across the ground. And what do you know? They came across a 6 foot by 2 foot disturbance in the ground, right where Lori said her mom should be. And so they got to digging, and just about 10 inches down, they came across a human skull. And not too long after that, after a little bit more digging, they uncovered a full skeleton. And with this skeleton, they found a bra and a girdle, and wrapped around the skeleton's neck was a pair of woman's tights. Now, because it had been buried for 27 years, the bacteria that grew under the ground, I want to say it contaminated the DNA, so DNA wasn't able to be used in the identification of these bones. Because even though this was where Lori said her mom should be and they found this skeleton, they still needed to identify it. And so since they couldn't just extract the DNA, they had to find other ways to identify the body. And this would come in the way of a mulberry tree root from a neighbor's backyard. So the mulberry tree root had grown through the skull, and they ended up sending this tree root to a dendrochronologist named Dr. Thomas Harlan. Now, I had no idea what a dendrochronologist was, so I looked it up, and it basically said that a dendrochronologist, it's a professional who studies tree rings to determine the dates and the chronological order of past events. And so, this tree root was sent to him, and he determined that the way the tree root grew into the skull or grew out of the skull, that the body had to have been placed there prior to the root growing. And since the root was 15 years old, that means that the body had to have been placed there prior to 1978. And so with this information in tow, the skeletal remains was sent to a forensic anthropologist who determined that the remains belonged to a white female who was between 5'4" and 5'5" in height, and who was between the ages of 20 and 40 years old, which were all consistent with Diane. She was white, between 5'4" and 5'5", and she was between 20 and 40 years old. However, they still could not definitively say that this was her, even though the skeletal remains kind of matched the description. So what the forensic anthropologist decided to do was a skull photograph superimposition, which is basically she would take the skull that they had and they would superimpose it onto a photo of Diane when she was living. And if the skull matched up to like her face, her facial features, I don't really know how they do it, but if it was a match, then they could definitively say that that was Diane. So they got a photo of Diane that was taken shortly before her disappearance. And in that photo, you can see that a canine tooth that Diane had was slightly out of place. And the skull also had a canine tooth that was slightly out of place. And so the forensic anthropologist lined up that tooth from the skull with the tooth of the photo and put them on top of each other, and it was a perfect match. And with this positive identification, 61-year-old Dianne Keidel was arrested and charged for the murder of Dianne Keidel. And in 1995, he would go to trial where Lori would testify against him and say that the night that her mother disappeared, all of the prior things that I told you did happen. Her mom did meet with Gene to talk about the divorce. She did drop him off at his apartment. She did go on a date with Bob, and Gene did call and come over to watch the kids because Diane was still out. But this is where things would differ a little bit, because Gene said that he fell asleep and didn't wake up till the next day when he seen Diane's car in the driveway. But Lori said that when her mom came home from her date, she and her dad had gotten into an argument. And she knows that this was true because she and her sister Susie had been woken up out of their sleep. And being the nosy little kids that they were, they kind of went to the top of the stairs to peek and see what was going on. And they could see that their mom and their dad were in fact arguing. And they also saw their dad hit their mom. And when he hit her, she kind of like fell back and hit her head and then fell to the floor, and she didn't move anymore after that. So after seeing this, she and Susie ran and hid for what felt like forever to them. But when they did come out of hiding and went to their bedroom window, which peered over their backyard, they saw their mom laying in the backyard lifeless while their dad dug a hole. And the very next day, Gene would buy concrete and add like a little patio to their backyard. Gene was ultimately convicted and sentenced to the rest of his life in prison and was there until his death on December 7th of 2004. Anyways, it's believed that Gene was actually the one who started the fire that killed Susie and Kelly in an attempt to, I don't even know what he was trying to do, maybe get more insurance. I don't know what would be his motive for the fact that two of them saw what had happened. Yeah. So, yeah, they believe that Gene was the one who started that fire in an attempt to get rid of all four of the kids, but two ended up making it out. And yeah, y'all, that is all I have for this case. Do y'all think Gene was the one who started the fire, or was it an accident? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you all in the next one. So Dianne Keidel was born on okay, girl, we're not starting at the beginning of the video. At the very beginning, though, can we get this together for like 5 minutes? Dang. In the meantime, while the investigation was going, what the fuck is an investigation? Now, naturally, people who knew the family around town and would see, no. Now, naturally, people who would, oh my goodness, why can't I say this? And the detective, and the detective didn't want to ask the detective didn't want, which he only spent 10 years, like 9, 10, 11. Damn, what did I say? Oh my gosh, I'm pretty sure I said something good before and now I'm fucking up.